a billionaire's cruel mockery of a homeless girl's artwork became the mistake that would change his life forever. In an instant, his wealth and power meant nothing as a simple drawing exposed the emptiness within him. What began as a moment of heartless ridicule would lead to a discovery so profound it would break through decades of emotional armor. This is the story of how a child with nothing taught a man with everything, the one lesson his billions couldn't buy. Maxwell Harrington had the world at his fingertips. His tech empire stretched across continents. His net worth had so many zeros that even his accountants had stopped counting. And his name adorned buildings in every major city. At 52, he commanded rooms with a mere glance and closed billion-dollar deals with a single nod. The Wall Street Journal had dubbed him the digital King Midas. Everything he touched turned to gold, and his ruthless business acumen had become legendary. But behind the gleaming smile that graced magazine covers lurked a man who felt nothing. A vast emptiness that no acquisition could fill, no matter how expensive or exclusive. His sprawling mansion in the hills echoed with emptiness each night. 40,000 square feet of marble, glass, and designer furniture that felt more like a museum than a home. The art on his walls, Picassos, Monets, and Basquiat's, were investments, not passions. He couldn't remember the last time he'd actually looked at any of them. The relationships in his life were transactional. Everyone wanted something. His inner circle consisted of yes-men and sycophants who laughed at his jokes and praised his genius while secretly updating their resumes. 3 divorces had taught him that love was just another commodity to be bought and sold, with prenuptial agreements thicker than novels. Even his charitable donations were calculated tax write-offs, carefully orchestrated by his PR team to maximize positive press coverage while minimizing actual impact on his fortune. Sentiment is for the weak, he often told his executives during their quarterly retreats to exotic locations. In this world, you're either the one writing the checks or the one begging for them. There is no middle ground, no room for hesitation. His voice would grow cold as he delivered these lines, his eyes scanning the room for any flicker of disagreement, ready to crush it. Maxwell believed this truth with absolute conviction. It had been hammered into him by a father who measured affection in achievements and refined through decades of corporate warfare, where he destroyed competitors without remorse. His worth was measured in dollars and power, and by that measure, he was worth more than most small countries. What need did he have for anything else? Compassion had never built an empire. Kindness had never closed a deal. Empathy was a luxury for those who couldn't afford ambition. His morning routine never varied. A precisely calculated protein, shake prepared by his personal nutritionist, a punishing workout with a trainer who charged more per hour than most people made in a month, and a briefing on overnight market movements in Asia while his driver navigated through traffic in his custom Bentley. Human interaction was limited to those who served a purpose. Anything else was inefficient. But Maxwell's carefully constructed world was about to collide with something his billions couldn't control. It was a crisp autumn evening when Maxwell's carefully controlled life veered off script. He had just delivered the keynote address at his foundation's annual gala, where the city's elite had gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity while sipping $1,000 champagne. His speech, crafted by a team of writers and delivered with practiced precision, had received a standing ovation. The event had raised over $30 million for children's education, though Maxwell knew most attendees were there for the tax benefits and networking opportunities rather than any genuine concern for underprivileged youth. Take the side streets, Maxwell instructed his driver as they left the venue, loosening his bow tie with an irritated tug. The main boulevard will be clogged with traffic from that street festival. I don't have time to sit behind tourists and food trucks. He despised inefficiency, and traffic represented the ultimate waste of his valuable time. The detour took them along the perimeter of Westlake Park, normally a place Maxwell would never deign to visit. His real estate portfolio included several properties in the area, but he viewed them as investments on spreadsheets, not actual places where people lived and gathered. As the Bentley idled at a red light, something unusual caught his eye. A small crowd gathered in a semicircle, their attention focused downward. "Wait here," he told his driver, a momentary curiosity overriding his impatience to get home. Perhaps it was the contrast to the polished event he'd just left, or simply the novelty of something unplanned in his meticulously scheduled life. But Maxwell found himself approaching the gathering. The crowd parted instinctively. Even in casual clothes, power radiated from him like heat. People always seemed to sense when someone important was near, like prey animals detecting a predator. At the center of attention was a girl, no more than 12, kneeling on the concrete. Her clothes were worn and mismatched, jeans with patches at the knees, a sweater several sizes too large with frayed cuffs, and shoes held together with duct tape. Her hair was pulled back in a tangled ponytail, and her face, though smudged with dirt, had a determined focus that struck Maxwell as oddly familiar. Around her were scattered a few meager possessions: a tattered backpack with a broken zipper, a thin blanket that had once been blue but was now a nondescript gray, and a plastic cup containing a handful of coins and a few crumpled dollar bills. But what had drawn the crowd was what she was creating. With nothing more than a set of broken chalk pastels, the girl was bringing to life an image of startling beauty. A phoenix rising from ashes, its wings outstretched against a twilight sky. The detail was extraordinary, the colors vibrant despite her humble materials. The bird's eyes seemed to contain an almost supernatural wisdom, and the flames surrounding it appeared to dance on the concrete. Several onlookers had dropped money into her cup, mesmerized by her talent. An elderly woman was wiping tears from her eyes, while a young couple stood hand in hand, transfixed by the image. Maxwell observed the scene with detached interest, calculating the inefficiency of her efforts. Such talent wasted on sidewalk art that would wash away with the next rain. If she had any business sense, she'd be creating on canvas, building a brand, monetizing her skill. This display of raw talent without strategic direction offended his sensibilities. The girl looked up, momentarily meeting his gaze, and something in her eyes, a dignity, a light, irritated him inexplicably. It was as though she saw through his expensive suit to something underneath that even he couldn't name. "Is that supposed to be art?" he asked, his voice cutting through the murmurs of admiration like a cold wind. The words escaped before he could consider them. Driven by an impulse he rarely indulged. Emotional reaction rather than calculated response. The crowd fell silent. The girl's hands paused mid-stroke, a piece of yellow chalk held delicately between slender fingers stained with color. A few people shuffled uncomfortably, looking between the imposing man in the tailored suit and the small figure kneeling on the ground. "My 5-year-old nephew could do better with his finger paints," Maxwell continued with a dismissive laugh that echoed hollowly in the sudden silence. "If you're going to beg, at least have the decency to be honest about it instead of pretending to be an artist. This is just emotional manipulation, using pity to extract money from gullible people." He could feel the shock ripple through the onlookers, but no one dared challenge him. A man in a business suit opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it when Maxwell's cold gaze swept over him. A woman pulled her child closer, whispering something in her ear. The girl said nothing, but her eyes never left his face, as if she were memorizing every feature. There was no anger in her expression, no hurt, only a profound curiosity that made Maxwell inexplicably uncomfortable, as though she were seeing something in him that he had long ago buried. With a scoff, Maxwell turned and walked back to his waiting car, already forgetting the encounter as he checked his phone for emails. His assistant had sent over the contracts for the Singapore acquisition, and the numbers looked promising. Just another forgettable moment in a day filled with far more important matters. By the time he slid back into the leather seat of his Bentley, the girl with the chalk had already been relegated to the periphery of his consciousness. Just another piece of urban scenery barely worth noticing. What Maxwell didn't realize was that his 15 seconds of cruelty would soon become the most expensive mistake of his life. 3 days after the park incident, Maxwell sat in his corner office on the 52nd floor, overlooking the city like a king surveying his domain. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of skyscrapers that seemed small from this height, their glass facades reflecting the morning sun. His desk, a single slab of rare Amazonian hardwood that had caused an environmental group to protest outside his building for a week, was meticulously organized. Not a paper out of place, not a speck of dust to be found. The morning had been productive. He'd fired 2 executives who failed to meet their quarterly targets and approved the acquisition of a promising startup that would soon be gutted for its patents and intellectual property. Its founders discarded like empty husks. Maxwell checked his Patek Philippe watch, a limited edition timepiece that cost more than most people's homes. His next meeting wasn't for another hour, giving him time to review the Asian market reports that had come in overnight. His investments in Singapore were performing particularly well, a fact that should have pleased him, but instead merely registered as expected. Success wasn't celebrated. It was assumed. Failure was what drew his attention and swift retribution. "Mr. Harrington." His assistant's voice came through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. Jessica had been with him for 6 years, longer than any of his marriages had lasted, primarily because she anticipated his needs and never wasted his time with trivialities. The fact that she was interrupting him now was unusual enough to warrant his attention. "There's a Ms. Elena Vasquez here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent. She says it's an urgent matter that requires your immediate attention." Maxwell frowned, the expression creating deep lines in his forehead that his dermatologist had recently suggested could be addressed with Botox, a suggestion he had dismissed with characteristic contempt. He didn't take unscheduled meetings, ever. His time was allocated weeks in advance, each minute accounted for and assigned a monetary value that few could afford. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice carrying the edge that made junior employees tremble. "She says she's from Child Protective Services. Something about a minor named Lily. She's showing government credentials and says she won't leave until she speaks with you personally." The name meant nothing to him. Maxwell scrolled through his mental Rolodex of business associates, political connections, and potential liabilities. No Lily appeared in any category that would warrant government intervention. "Tell her to make an appointment like everyone else," he said dismissively. "Whatever it is, can wait until my schedule permits. If she persists, have security escort her to the lobby." "Yes, sir," Jessica replied, though something in her tone suggested she doubted the effectiveness of this approach. Maxwell returned to his reports, the interruption already forgotten as he analyzed profit margins and market projections. The quarterly earnings call was approaching, and shareholders had been restless since the European expansion had cost more than initially projected. Not that it mattered in the long run. Maxwell played a longer game than most investors could comprehend, seeing market shifts years before they materialized. 15 minutes later, His office door opened without warning, an unprecedented breach of protocol that caused Maxwell to look up in genuine surprise. A woman in her 40s with steel-rimmed glasses, salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a no-nonsense charcoal pantsuit strode in with the confidence of someone who regularly faced down far more intimidating obstacles than an angry billionaire. She carried a worn leather portfolio clutched against her chest like armor. Behind her followed his flustered assistant, her normally composed demeanor visibly shaken. "I'm so sorry, sir. She went right past me and the security team seems to—" "I called them, but it's fine, Jessica," Maxwell said, rising slowly from his chair. Despite his irritation, he appreciated boldness, even when it inconvenienced him. People who took what they wanted rather than asking permission were rare in a world where most deferred to power automatically. "Ms. Vasquez, I presume?" "Mr. Harrington," she acknowledged with a curt nod, placing a folder on his immaculate desk without waiting for permission. Her movements were efficient and practiced, suggesting years of navigating bureaucratic obstacles and difficult personalities. "I'll be brief, since I understand your time is valuable. 3 nights ago, you encountered a young girl named Lily Morgan at Westlake Park. You publicly humiliated her while she was creating artwork to survive." The memory surfaced reluctantly, like a bubble rising through thick oil. The park, the crowd, the girl with the chalk drawings. A fleeting moment he had discarded as insignificant among the thousands of decisions and interactions that comprised his day. "The beggar with the chalk drawings? What about her?" he asked, his tone making it clear he considered this beneath his attention. Elena's expression hardened, the lines around her mouth deepening. She had clearly expected this response, but still seemed disappointed by it. "That beggar is 12 years old, Mr. Harrington. Her name is Lily Morgan. She's been living on the streets with her mother for the past 8 months since they lost their apartment when the building was purchased by Harrington Enterprises and converted to luxury condominiums. Her mother, Rebecca Morgan, was hospitalized yesterday with severe pneumonia, leaving Lily with no guardian." Maxwell registered the coincidence of his company's involvement with mild interest, but no concern. Real estate acquisitions often displaced tenants, an unfortunate but necessary aspect of urban development and progress. His company always followed legal requirements for notification and relocation assistance. If this woman and her daughter had ended up homeless, they had likely failed to take advantage of the resources available. "This is tragic," he said, glancing pointedly at his watch. "But I fail to see what it has to do with me personally. My foundation donates millions to homeless shelters and children's services annually. Perhaps you should direct the girl there. Now, if you'll excuse me." "I'm not here about your tax deductions, Mr. Harrington," Elena said, her voice cutting through his dismissal like a blade. She opened the folder with deliberate slowness, maintaining eye contact as she did so. "I'm here because of this." She slid a document across his desk. Maxwell glanced down, then froze, his hand hovering above the paper as though it might burn him. It was a birth certificate, Lily Morgan's birth certificate. Date of birth, March 17th, 2013. Mother, Rebecca Lynn Morgan, and listed as the father was Maxwell Edward Harrington. For perhaps the first time in decades, Maxwell was genuinely speechless. The blood seemed to drain from his face, pooling somewhere in his expensive Italian leather shoes. His mind, so adept at processing complex financial data and predicting market trends, stuttered like an old engine trying to turn over in freezing weather. "This is absurd," he said finally, pushing the paper away as though it were contaminated. "I've never heard of this child. I don't have a daughter. This is clearly some kind of scam, a desperate attempt to extract money. Do you have any idea how many paternity claims are filed against men in my position? My legal team handles these matters. Elena's expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed to have expected this exact reaction, as though she were checking items off a mental list. DNA doesn't lie, Mr. Harrington. We ran the tests this morning after finding your information in Rebecca's belongings. The hospital took samples when Lily was admitted for dehydration and malnutrition 2 days ago, conditions directly resulting from living on the street. The results are conclusive. Lily is your biological daughter. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the familiar surroundings suddenly alien. Maxwell gripped the edge of his desk, the cool wood grounding him. Impossible. I would know if I had a child. My legal team is thorough. Any legitimate claim would have been brought to my attention. Would you? Elena asked, her head tilting slightly. According to Rebecca Morgan's detailed journals, which we recovered from their storage locker, you had a brief relationship 13 years ago when she worked as a paralegal at Goldstein and Meyer, the law firm handling your first divorce from Elise Harrington. When Rebecca told you she was pregnant, you accused her of trying to trap you for financial gain and had her fired. She never pursued child support because she knew your resources would crush her in court, and she wanted to protect her child from what she described as a legal battle that would taint Lily's perception of her father. She hoped that someday you might seek them out on your own. Fragments of memory began to surface. A quiet, intelligent woman with kind eyes who had brought him coffee during late-night depositions and actually listened when he complained about his soon-to-be ex-wife's demands. Rebecca. They had spent a few weekends together, a brief distraction during a stressful time. He vaguely recalled her trying to contact him afterward, but his assistant had handled it, as she did with all unwanted communications. It had never occurred to him to ask what the woman had wanted. Even if this is true, Maxwell said, regaining his composure with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to crisis management, what exactly do you expect from me? Money? A settlement? I'm happy to have my team arrange appropriate support, but I'm not interested in disrupting my life for a child I've never met. Elena leaned forward, placing both hands on his desk, her voice quiet but intense. What I expect, Mr. Harrington, is for you to take responsibility for your child. Rebecca will be hospitalized for at least 2 weeks. Her condition is serious. Years of inadequate health care and the stress of homelessness have taken their toll. Lily has no other family. She either goes into the foster system, where she'll likely be bounced between multiple homes given her age and the current shortage of placements, or the implication hung in the air between them like smoke, acrid and suffocating. You can't seriously expect me to take in a homeless child I've never met, Maxwell said, incredulous. I run a global company with operations in 17 countries. I travel constantly. I'm in meetings 14 hours a day. I'm not equipped to babysit. It would be irresponsible for everyone involved. Then I suggest you get equipped, Elena replied, standing to her full height. There was no anger in her voice, only a calm certainty that was somehow more unsettling. Because right now, you're the only parent Lily has. And after what I witnessed in that park, a grown man publicly humiliating his own daughter without even knowing who she was, I'm not particularly sympathetic to your scheduling conflicts. She placed a business card on his desk, the simple white rectangle somehow more threatening than any legal document. Lily is currently at Mercy Children's Center, recovering from her recent hospital stay. You have until 5 p.m. today to make arrangements, or we proceed with emergency foster placement. Given the circumstances and your obvious resources, the court will likely fast-track any petition for temporary guardianship. As Elena walked to the door, her sensible heels clicking on the marble floor, she paused and turned back. Oh, and Mr. Harrington? That phoenix lily was drawing when you mocked her? She creates one every year on the anniversary of the day you rejected her mother. She says it represents rising from the ashes of abandonment. She's been winning regional art competitions since she was 8, despite having no formal training. Quite the artist, your daughter. She has your eyes, by the way. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. Maxwell remained standing behind his desk, the birth certificate still lying where Elena had placed it. The name, Lily Morgan Harrington, staring up at him in official black ink. For the first time in years, his next meeting was the furthest thing from his mind. The empire he had built, the wealth he had accumulated, the power he wielded, all of it suddenly seemed hollow in the face of a simple truth he had never considered. Somewhere in this city was a child with his blood in her veins, his name on her birth certificate, and his cruelty fresh in her memory. The intercom buzzed. "Sir?" Jessica's voice sounded uncertain. "Your 11:30 is here. Should I reschedule?" Maxwell stared at the birth certificate for a long moment before pressing the button. "Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day, and get me everything you can find on Rebecca and Lily Morgan. Everything." As he sank back into his chair, Maxwell Harrington, the man who controlled markets and moved billions with a signature, felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: complete and utter loss of control. The carefully constructed narrative of his life had just been rewritten by a single piece of paper and a 12-year-old girl with chalk-stained fingers who drew phoenixes rising from ashes. The Mercy Children's Center was housed in a converted Victorian mansion on the outskirts of the city, a relic of more gracious times, now serving as a temporary haven for children caught in life's crossfire. The building stood 3 stories tall, its faded grandeur still evident in the intricate gingerbread trim, the sweeping wraparound porch, and the stained glass window that crowned the entryway. Once the home of a lumber baron who had made his fortune clear-cutting the very forests that had sustained indigenous communities for centuries, it now offered sanctuary to those displaced by modern capitalism's equally ruthless machinery. Maxwell's gleaming Bentley Mulsanne, custom midnight blue with hand-stitched leather interior, looked obscenely out of place in the modest parking lot, drawing curious glances from staff members walking to their sensible sedans and practical SUVs. The irony wasn't lost on him. Wealth had always isolated him, but never had the divide between his world and others felt so stark and uncomfortable. "Wait here," he told his driver, straightening his Hermes tie, a nervous habit he thought he'd abandoned years ago. "This shouldn't take long." Even as he said it, Maxwell wondered at his own assumption. How long should it take to meet the daughter you never knew existed? Was there a protocol, a timeline for such encounters? For once in his meticulously scheduled life, he had no agenda, no clear objective beyond the nebulous concept of meeting this child who shared his DNA. The center's director, Dr. Sarah Chen, met him in the lobby, a warm space filled with well-worn furniture upholstered in cheerful patterns, shelves of donated books with cracked spines, and walls adorned with children's artwork. The contrast to his own sterile, minimalist penthouse was jarring. Everything here had been touched, used, lived with. Nothing was for display only. Dr. Chen was a compact woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and intelligent eyes that assessed him without pretense. Maxwell noticed she didn't offer to shake his hand, a deliberate choice that spoke volumes about her impression of him before they'd exchanged a single word. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her tone professional but cool, like a doctor addressing a patient with a self-inflicted injury. Miss Vasquez informed me you might be coming. I understand you're here about Lily Morgan. Yes, Maxwell replied, uncomfortable with the scrutiny in her eyes. He was accustomed to being the one who evaluated others, who held the power in every interaction. Here, in this children's center with its handprint murals and construction paper chains hanging from the ceiling, his usual authority felt diminished. I'd like to see her. Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, but her posture shifted subtly, a guardian moving into a protective stance. Lily has been through a significant trauma. Her mother's hospitalization, her time on the streets, and now this sudden revelation about her parentage. I need to know your intentions before I allow that meeting. For a man accustomed to immediate compliance, this gatekeeping was jarring. In his world, doors opened automatically, people stepped aside, requests became immediate actions. The gentle but firm resistance from this woman, whose salary probably matched his hourly investment returns, was both novel and vaguely irritating. My intentions? I'm her father. I have a right to see her. The words came out more defensive than he'd intended, an automatic assertion of privilege rather than the reasoned response he prided himself on. Rights and responsibilities go hand in hand, Mr. Harrington, Dr. Chen replied evenly, unintimidated by his tone or stature. Until 3 hours ago, you were unaware of her existence, through no fault of hers. What exactly are you planning to do now? Children in Lily's situation don't need curiosity seekers or temporary saviors who disappear when the novelty wears off. They need consistency, commitment, and care. It was a fair question, and one Maxwell had been avoiding since Elena Vasquez had walked out of his office. His legal team had confirmed the DNA match with remarkable speed, money removing the usual bureaucratic delays, and was already exploring options ranging from financial support arrangements to potential custody agreements. But what he actually intended to do with this newfound daughter remained nebulous, a blank space in the otherwise detailed blueprint of his life. I'm still processing this situation, he admitted reluctantly, the unfamiliar taste of uncertainty bitter on his tongue. But I'm not in the habit of shirking responsibilities, even unexpected ones. Dr. Chen studied him for a moment, her gaze uncomfortably perceptive, then nodded. Follow me. But I should warn you. Lily knows who you are, both from the park incident and because her mother has been honest with her about her parentage. Don't expect a warm reception. She led him through corridors decorated with children's artwork, splashes of color and imagination that seemed to mock the sterile perfection of his own office with its carefully selected abstract paintings valued more for their investment potential than aesthetic appeal. They passed rooms where small groups of children engaged in various activities, a therapy session with puppets, teenagers huddled around a table playing cards, a toddler being comforted by a volunteer. Each tableau a reminder of the human cost of society's failures, the collateral damage of broken systems and broken promises. They stopped outside a room with art therapy painted on the door in rainbow letters, surrounded by handprints of various sizes. Through the window in the door, Maxwell could see a small figure hunched over a table, completely absorbed in whatever she was creating. Her dark hair, his color, he realized with a jolt, fell forward, partially obscuring her face as she worked. The sight triggered an unexpected memory, himself at that age, building intricate models of skyscrapers while his parents argued in the next room, losing himself in the details to escape the chaos of a marriage disintegrating around him. He had forgotten that child, buried him under decades of acquisitions and achievements. "Would you like me to introduce you?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice gentler now, perhaps recognizing the vulnerability in his expression, a look few had ever witnessed on the face of Maxwell Harrington. Maxwell shook his head. "No, I'll handle this myself." Delegation was his usual approach. He employed people specifically to handle uncomfortable situations. But something told him this was a moment he needed to face directly. Some responsibilities couldn't be outsourced, no matter how much one was willing to pay. As he entered the room, Lily didn't look up. The space was filled with natural light from large windows, the walls covered with artwork in various stages of completion. Art supplies were organized in colorful bins, a stark contrast to the near-empty backpack she'd had in the park. She continued working on her drawing, a detailed cityscape that Maxwell recognized as downtown, though rendered in fantastical colors that gave the familiar skyline an otherworldly quality. Purple skyscrapers reached toward an orange sky, while figures the size of ants moved through streets that seemed to flow like rivers. Her hands moved with confidence, each stroke deliberate, each color choice intentional. "Hello, Lily," he said, his voice sounding strange in his own ears, softer than his boardroom tone, but still stiff with uncertainty. The words felt inadequate, absurdly conventional for such an unconventional meeting. She paused, her hand hovering above the paper, but didn't look up. The colored pencil in her grip, electric blue, remained suspended over the cityscape like a tiny lightning bolt. "I know who you are." "Yes, I imagine you do." Maxwell remained standing awkwardly by the door, suddenly aware that all his negotiation skills, his ability to command rooms full of powerful executives, his talent for bending conversations to his will, all were useless in this context. He had prepared for hostile takeovers and market crashes, but not for this moment with this child. "You're the man who laughed at my phoenix," she said, finally raising her eyes to meet his. The resemblance was undeniable. She had his eyes, the same unusual shade of gray-blue that had stared back at him from mirrors his entire life. She had his cheekbones, his straight nose, even the slight furrow between her brows that his mother had always called his thinking line. But there was something else there too. A resilience, a quiet dignity that reminded him of Rebecca. "I am," he acknowledged, resisting the lifelong urge to qualify or explain. To say he'd been tired, distracted, that he hadn't really looked at the drawing. The excuses died unspoken. "And I'm also your father." Lily nodded, returning to her drawing with a deliberate focus that seemed both childlike in its absorption and adult in its discipline. "Mom told me. She said you were too busy being important to be a dad." The simple assessment landed like a physical blow, more devastating than any criticism from business rivals or financial analysts. Maxwell moved closer, taking in the details of her appearance he'd missed in the park. Despite her circumstances, the second-hand clothes, the stress no 12-year-old should carry, there was a dignity in her posture, a self-possession that reminded him of himself. "Your mother was partially right," he said, surprising himself with the admission. In business, he never conceded points unnecessarily. Yet here he was, acknowledging failure to a child. "I've been busy building things that seemed important at the time." "Like the building where we used to live?" Lily asked, her tone deceptively casual as she selected a vibrant purple pencil from the array before her. "The one your company bought before we had to leave?" "Mom cried when we got the notice. She said it was like you were pushing us away twice." Maxwell felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest, a sensation both painful and foreign. The coincidence that had seemed inconsequential hours ago now felt like cosmic irony of the cruelest kind. His own company had displaced his daughter, leaving her homeless, leading directly to their encounter in the park. The invisible hand of the market he so revered had slapped him across the face, with the consequences of his own actions. "I didn't know," he said, aware of how inadequate the words were even as he spoke them. How many times had he dismissed concerns about displaced tenants with the same phrase? "I didn't know." As if ignorance absolved responsibility, as if not seeing the faces affected by his decisions made the effects any less real. "Would it have mattered if you did?" Lily asked, her eyes, his eyes, meeting his with a directness that few adults managed when facing him across a negotiation table. There was no accusation in her tone, only genuine curiosity, which somehow made the question more devastating. It was a question that cut to the heart of who he was, who he had become over decades of prioritizing profit over people. Would knowing this child existed have changed any of his decisions over the years? Would it have altered his ruthless approach to business, his single-minded pursuit of wealth and power? Would he have checked the tenant lists of buildings his company acquired, looked for her name among those being displaced by his vision of progress? "I don't know," he answered honestly, perhaps for the first time in years offering a response that wasn't calculated for maximum advantage. "But I know it matters now." Lily considered this, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. She set down the purple pencil and selected a deep red one, adding what looked like sunset reflections to the windows of the skyscrapers in her drawing. "Mom's really sick. The doctors say she needs expensive medicine and rest. We don't have insurance anymore. It got canceled when she lost her job at the library." The statement wasn't a request or accusation, just a fact presented with the clear-eyed pragmatism of a child who had grown up too quickly, who had learned that adults often failed to address the obvious unless it was stated plainly. "I'll take care of that," Maxwell said immediately, relieved to find familiar ground, problems that could be solved with money. "Your mother will receive the best care available. I'll have my assistant arrange a transfer to the Harrington Medical Center. The chief of pulmonology there is world-renowned." "And then what?" Lily asked, setting down her pencil and turning to face him fully for the first time. Her gaze was unflinching, assessing him with the same calculating intensity he used when evaluating potential acquisitions. "We still don't have a place to live. Mom can't work when she's sick. We'll just end up on the street again." The simplicity of her concern, so far removed from the complex financial structures and global markets that occupied his days, made Maxwell acutely aware of how disconnected he had become from the basic realities of human existence. While he deliberated over billion-dollar deals, this child worried about where she would sleep. "That won't happen," he said, with the same certainty he used to reassure nervous investors before a major market play. "I have a house, several houses actually. There's more than enough room." Lily's expression remained skeptical, her experience having taught her that adult promises were fragile things, easily broken when inconvenient. "You want me to live with you? You don't even know me. You don't know what I like to eat, or when I go to bed, or what subjects I'm good at in school." The slight tremor in her voice betrayed the bravado. Beneath the mature facade was still a child facing enormous uncertainty. "I'd like the opportunity to learn those things," Maxwell said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "I've missed 12 years. I don't want to miss any more." For the first time, Lily's composure cracked slightly, uncertainty flickering across her face like a shadow. "What if you don't like me? What if I don't like you?" The questions tumbled out, revealing the fear beneath her careful control. What if you get tired of having a kid around and send me away? Foster homes are worse than shelters sometimes. That's what everyone says. It was the most childlike thing she'd said since he entered the room. A reminder that beneath the prematurely adult exterior was still a 12-year-old girl facing yet another massive change in her already tumultuous life. The weight of her fear, so rational given her experience, made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar ache. Maxwell did something then that would have shocked anyone who knew him in the business world. He knelt down to her level, his bespoke suit touching the floor that countless children had traversed, meeting her eyes directly without the advantage of his imposing height. That's a risk I'm willing to take if you are. I can't promise I'll be good at this immediately. I've never been a father before. But I can promise I won't send you away, no matter what. Lily studied him with an intensity that made him feel transparent, as though she could see past the expensive suit and practice charm to something more fundamental. The scared boy who had built skyscrapers out of blocks while his parents' marriage crumbled. The young man who had replaced dreams of creating with the safer pursuit of acquiring. The adult who had buried vulnerability so deeply he'd forgotten it existed. "You laughed at my art," she said finally, the hurt evident beneath the accusation. It wasn't a negotiation tactic or a bid for sympathy, just a truth she needed acknowledged before anything else could proceed. "I did," Maxwell admitted, resisting the lifelong urge to justify or defend. "And I was wrong. Not just because you're my daughter, but because what you created was beautiful. I've forgotten how to see beauty that can't be bought or sold. I've forgotten a lot of things that used to matter to me." Lily considered this for a long moment, then reached into her backpack, the same tattered one from the park, and pulled out a folded paper. She handed it to him without explanation, her expression guarded yet hopeful. Maxwell opened it carefully, conscious of the trust implied in the gesture. It was a drawing of the phoenix from the park, but completed, rising triumphant from swirling ashes, its wings spanning the entire page, its eyes containing a wisdom and determination that seemed to transcend the medium. The detail was extraordinary, each feather distinct, the flames rendered with such skill they almost seemed to move on the page. At the bottom, in careful lettering, was written, "Some things can't be broken." "Mom says art speaks when words aren't enough," Lily said, watching his reaction with cautious intensity. "This one's about not giving up, no matter what gets taken away. I draw it every year on the day you told Mom you didn't want us." Something shifted in Maxwell's chest, a sensation so unfamiliar, it took him a moment to recognize it as emotion unrelated to ambition or achievement. This child, his child, had created beauty from the ashes of abandonment and homelessness. She had persevered where he might have broken. She had transformed pain into something transcendent, while he had merely accumulated wealth as insulation against feeling anything at all. "It's extraordinary," he said, his voice rough with unexpected feeling. "You're extraordinary." Lily didn't smile. Trust would clearly take more than compliments. But some of the wariness left her eyes. "I'm not moving in with you unless Mom says it's okay when she gets better. And I'm keeping my art supplies. And I need to finish the school year at Westlake Elementary, even if it's far from your house. I promised Miss Abernathy I'd do the mural for the library." Maxwell nodded, recognizing a negotiation when he heard one, respecting the clarity of her terms. "That seems reasonable. I can arrange transportation to keep you at your current school. And perhaps, if you're willing, you could teach me how to see what you see when you create. It's been a long time since I looked at anything just for the joy of looking." For the first time, Lily's expression softened slightly, a glimpse of the child she might have been in more fortunate circumstances. Mom says you used to build things before you started buying and selling them. She said you wanted to be an architect once, that you used to sketch buildings that looked like they came from the future. The observation caught him off guard. A dream so long abandoned, he'd almost forgotten it himself. Before spreadsheets and stock options, before leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers, he had indeed wanted to create, to build spaces that would inspire and endure. He had filled notebooks with designs, spent hours in the library studying the work of Wright and Gehry and Hadid, imagining structures that would change how people experience the world around them. "Your mother has a good memory," he said quietly, wondering what else Rebecca had told their daughter. What version of him existed in Lily's mind before their encounter in the park? "She kept all the blueprints you drew for her," Lily continued, turning back to her cityscape but watching him from the corner of her eye. The house with the glass ceiling and the garden inside. "She said it was the only gift you ever gave her that mattered." Maxwell felt something crack within him, a fissure in the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for decades. He remembered that blueprint, sketched late one night when Rebecca had mentioned loving stars but hating the cold. A house where she could see the sky without leaving her bed, where trees grew in the central atrium, where the boundaries between inside and outside blurred. He had spent weeks refining the design, incorporating elements that reflected her love of nature and open spaces. It was the last purely creative act he could remember. Everything after had been about acquisition rather than creation. "I never built it," he said, the admission carrying the weight of all his abandoned possibilities, the roads not taken that had led him to this moment. Kneeling on a worn carpet in a children's center, holding a drawing of a phoenix rising from ashes. "You still could," Lily replied, with the simple conviction of youth, adding a final touch to her fantastical cityscape. A tiny figure standing atop the highest building, arms outstretched as if embracing the entire city below. "Mom says it's never too late to build something that matters." As they sat together in that room filled with art, Maxwell Harrington, titan of industry, ruthless businessman, and newly discovered father, felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. The quiet but persistent hope that perhaps he could become more than the sum of his acquisitions. That perhaps this unexpected detour might lead him back to the person he had once intended to be. What he didn't yet realize was that the most valuable asset he would ever acquire was sitting across from him, teaching him to see the world through eyes unclouded by the pursuit of profit. A lesson that would ultimately cost him everything he thought he valued, and give him everything he never knew he needed. As Lily carefully gathered her art supplies, preparing to show him more of her work, Maxwell made a silent promise to the phoenix on the page before him. He too would rise from the ashes of the man he had become, and perhaps, in doing so, become worthy of the daughter he never knew he had. The first week of their new arrangement was a study in contrasts. Maxwell's penthouse, a sprawling 7,000-square-foot monument to minimalist luxury, occupying the entire top floor of the Harrington, the skyscraper bearing his name, had never felt so cavernous yet so crowded. Every surface was a statement of wealth. Rare marble imported from Italian quarries, furniture designed by celebrities whose waiting lists stretched years, art pieces selected not for personal connection, but for investment potential. It was a space designed to impress, not to live in. Into this sterile perfection came Lily, with her battered backpack and cardboard portfolio of drawings, her second-hand clothes, and quiet watchfulness. She moved through the space like an anthropologist in a foreign land, studying the strange customs of the wealthy with scientific detachment. "Where are your things?" she asked on that first evening, standing in the center of the great room with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city below. "What do you mean?" Maxwell replied, setting down her small duffel bag in the guest suite that his housekeeper had hastily prepared. "Your personal things," Lily clarified, gesturing to the pristine surroundings. "Photos, souvenirs, stuff you like. Everything looks like a hotel." The observation was uncomfortably perceptive. In truth, Maxwell had homes in 6 countries, each decorated by professionals to achieve the same impersonal perfection, each containing nothing that couldn't be replaced. He traveled between them like a ghost, leaving no impression deeper than the temporary indentation in a mattress. "I suppose I've never been particularly sentimental," he said, realizing how hollow the words sounded even as he spoke them. Lily nodded, as if confirming a theory. "Mom keeps everything. Ticket stubs, birthday cards, rocks I find that look interesting. She says objects hold memories." The simple statement revealed volumes about the difference between wealth and richness, a distinction Maxwell had long ago forgotten. Rebecca, even in poverty, had created a home filled with meaning. He, with all his resources, had built only showcases. "The room seems very big for one person," Lily said later, standing in the doorway of her new bedroom suite, which was larger than the entire apartment she had shared with her mother before their eviction. "We can find something smaller if you'd prefer," Maxwell offered, misunderstanding her hesitation. "No, it's just—" Lily paused, struggling to articulate the strangeness of her new reality. "Mom and I used to share a mattress in the shelter. Before that, we shared a bedroom in our apartment. I've never slept alone in a room before." The admission hit Maxwell with unexpected force. While he had been accumulating square footage he rarely used, his daughter had been learning to sleep in crowded shelters, to make herself small enough to fit into the margins of a world that had no space for her. "Would you like me to leave a light on?" he asked, grasping for solutions to a problem he barely understood. Lily shook her head. "I'll be okay. I just need to get used to it." Her brave face couldn't quite mask the anxiety beneath. That night, after checking on her twice and finding her still awake, staring at the ceiling, Maxwell did something impulsive. He retrieved a box from his storage closet, one of the few personal items he'd kept over the years. Inside was a small model skyscraper he'd built as a child, the one possession he'd taken when leaving his parents' home at 18. "I thought you might like this," he said, placing it on her nightstand. "I made it when I was about your age. It used to help me feel less alone." Lily studied the miniature building with its careful details and tiny windows. "You really made this?" "I did. Before I became whatever I am now, I wanted to build things that would last." She touched the model gently, tracing its lines with an artist's appreciation. "It's like a little world." "Yes, I suppose it is," Maxwell replied, seeing the simple creation through her eyes, not as the childish effort he'd long dismissed it as, but as evidence of dreams he'd once held. "Can you show me how to make one sometime?" Lily asked, her voice softer with approaching sleep. "I'd like that," Maxwell said, surprised by how much he meant it. When he checked again an hour later, she was finally asleep, one hand resting near the model building as if keeping it safe. The challenges of their new reality manifested in unexpected ways. Maxwell's morning routine, a precisely timed sequence of exercise, calls to international markets, and meetings, now included making breakfast for a child who regarded his protein shakes with undisguised skepticism. "Don't you have any normal food?" she asked on the second morning, peering into his refrigerator with its array of prepared meals delivered weekly by his nutritionist. "What would you consider normal?" Maxwell asked, realizing he had no idea what 12-year-olds ate. "Cereal, toast. Mom makes oatmeal with cinnamon when we have a stove." The simplicity of the request highlighted the absurdity of his existence. He owned controlling interests in agricultural conglomerates that produced grain consumed by millions, yet had no oatmeal in his pantry. "We'll go shopping today," he promised, making a mental note to have his assistant research appropriate foods for growing children. Lily nodded, accepting his limitations with the patience of someone accustomed to adult inadequacies. "I can make a list. I know how to cook some things." The offer, from a child who should have been focused on schoolwork and play, not survival skills, was another indictment of his world and its priorities. That afternoon, Maxwell Harrington, whose calendar was typically booked months in advance, found himself in a grocery store for the first time in decades, following his daughter through aisles of ordinary food at prices so negligible to him, they might as well have been free. "We need to check what's on sale," Lily said automatically, reaching for the store circular. "That's not necessary," Maxwell replied gently. "We can get whatever you like." Lily looked up at him, her expression a mixture of wonder and wariness. "Anything?" "Anything." She considered this new reality carefully, then nodded toward the produce section. "Fresh fruit first, then. Mom says it's the most important thing to get when you have money, because it goes bad at the shelter and food banks mostly give canned stuff." As they filled their cart with apples and oranges, bread and peanut butter, oatmeal and cinnamon, Maxwell observed his daughter's methodical approach to shopping, checking prices despite his assurances, selecting items with careful deliberation, occasionally allowing herself small luxuries like raspberry jam or chocolate chip cookies, with an expression that suggested she expected the permission to be revoked at any moment. "You're very good at this," he observed as she compared 2 brands of pasta sauce, reading the nutrition labels with practiced efficiency. "Mom taught me. She says knowing how to make food stretch is more important than having a lot of it." Lily selected the larger jar, which offered better value per ounce. "When we had an apartment, we used to cook big batches on Sunday and freeze portions for the whole week." Each casual revelation was a window into a life Maxwell had never imagined. One where his daughter had learned to calculate cost per unit at an age when his own concerns had been limited to which private school his parents would send him to next. At the checkout, when the total came to less than what Maxwell typically spent on a single business lunch, Lily watched him hand over his credit card with a mixture of fascination and concern. "That's a lot of money," she whispered as they left with their bags. "Not really," Maxwell replied. Then, seeing her expression, added, "But you're right to be careful with resources. That's very responsible." Lily nodded, accepting the compromise between her reality and his. "Mom says money doesn't solve problems, but it buys time to solve them yourself." The wisdom in the observation, so at odds with his own philosophy that wealth was both means and end, left Maxwell momentarily speechless. Rebecca had apparently taught their daughter a healthier relationship with money than he had managed to develop in 5 decades of accumulating it. The most profound adjustments came in the evenings, when Maxwell would typically retreat to his home office to continue working until exhaustion drove him to bed. Now, there was a child who needed attention, who had homework to complete and questions about her mother's condition that required thoughtful answers. "Can we visit Mom tomorrow?" Lily asked on the third night, looking up from her math worksheet. True to his word, Maxwell had arranged for Rebecca's transfer to the Harrington Medical Center, where she was receiving treatment for severe pneumonia complicated by long-term stress and malnutrition. Of course, I'll clear my schedule for the afternoon. The words came easily, though they represented a seismic shift in priorities that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. Board meetings could be rescheduled. His daughter's need to see her mother could not. Will she get better soon? The question contained all the vulnerability Lily worked so hard to conceal during daylight hours. Maxwell hesitated, balancing honesty with reassurance. The doctors say she's responding well to treatment, but it will take time. Her body needs rest to heal completely. Lily nodded, absorbing this with the stoicism of a child accustomed to difficult truths. When I was little and got sick, she used to draw pictures of the germs as tiny monsters, and then draw my white blood cells as superheroes fighting them off. It made it less scary. The image, so creative, so loving, so unlike anything from his own childhood of clinical doctors and distant parents, made Maxwell acutely aware of all Rebecca had managed to give their daughter despite having so little. That sounds like a wonderful way to understand illness, he said, trying to imagine the woman he had so casually dismissed, creating such moments of magic for their child. Your mother is very wise. She is, Lily agreed, returning to her homework. She always says problems look smaller when you draw them. That's why I like art. You can make the scary things fit on a piece of paper where you can see all of them at once. The insight was profound in its simplicity. Maxwell thought of the complex problems he navigated daily: market fluctuations, competitor strategies, resource allocations, and wondered how they might appear if rendered visible, contained within borders he could see in their entirety. Would you show me how? He asked impulsively. How to draw problems to make them smaller? Lily looked up, surprised by the request. You want me to teach you to draw? If you're willing, Maxwell replied, feeling strangely vulnerable. I used to draw buildings when I was your age, but I haven't created anything in a very long time. Lily considered this, then nodded with the seriousness of a master accepting an apprentice. We can start with shapes. Everything is just shapes put together in different ways. She cleared her homework aside and took out her sketchbook, tearing out a blank page for him. As she guided him through basic forms, circles becoming spheres with the addition of shadow, rectangles transforming into three-dimensional structures, Maxwell found himself fully present for the first time in years. His mind focused on the simple challenge of making a line go where he intended. You press too hard, Lily observed, watching him grip the pencil like a weapon. Drawing is about being gentle first. You can always make lines darker later, but you can't make them disappear if they're too heavy. The metaphor wasn't lost on Maxwell. How many decisions had he made with too much force, creating marks that couldn't be erased? How different might his life have been if he had approached it with a lighter touch, allowing for adjustments and corrections? By the time they finished the impromptu lesson, Maxwell had produced a rudimentary sketch of the city skyline. Nowhere near Lily's skill level, but recognizable nonetheless. More importantly, he had spent an hour thinking about nothing but the movement of his hand across paper, the relationship between objects and space, the fundamentals of creation rather than acquisition. It's not bad for a first try, Lily said, studying his effort with professional seriousness. You still remember some things. Thank you, Maxwell replied, surprised by how much her approval meant to him. I had an excellent teacher. Lily smiled then, a real smile that transformed her serious face into something bright and young. It was the first time he had seen her fully unguarded. and the effect was like sunrise breaking over the city skyline, illuminating possibilities he had forgotten existed. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Maxwell sat alone in his living room, looking out at the city he had helped shape through decades of development and investment. From this height, the streets were just lines, the buildings mere shapes against the night sky. People were invisible, their struggles and triumphs, their losses and hopes, all reduced to abstract concepts by distance. He thought of Lily's phoenix rising from ashes, of Rebecca creating superhero white blood cells to battle illness monsters, of the house with a glass ceiling he had designed but never built. He thought of all the ways creativity could transform reality, not by denying its harshness, but by reimagining its possibilities. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Maxwell Harrington picked up a pencil not to sign a contract or approve a budget, but to create something new. He began to sketch, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The outline of a house where stars would be visible from every room, where trees would grow indoors, where a child who had known too much hardship might find safety and wonder in equal measure. It was just a drawing, just lines on paper. But as Lily had taught him, sometimes making a problem small enough to fit on a page was the first step toward solving it. And perhaps the problem he had been avoiding his entire adult life was not how to accumulate more, but how to become whole. How to recover the parts of himself he had sacrificed in pursuit of wealth and power. As the night deepened around him, Maxwell continued to draw, adding details to his creation. A studio filled with art supplies, a kitchen designed for cooking together, spaces that invited connection rather than impressed visitors. It wasn't just a house taking shape on the page, but a home. Something he had owned many of, but never truly possessed. Tomorrow would bring complications. Explanations to his executive team about his sudden schedule changes, discussions with Rebecca's doctors about long-term care, the 1,000 adjustments required to incorporate a child into a life designed for solitary achievement. But for tonight, in the quiet hours between one day and the next, Maxwell allowed himself to imagine a different kind of future than the one he had been building. One measured not in acquisitions, but in moments, not in assets, but in connections. It was a blueprint unlike any he had commissioned before. Not for another monument to his success, but for the life he might still create from the ashes of the one he had outgrown.